Welcome to the 2018 Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series. I'm Drew Dawson, station manager and host at Georgia Public Broadcasting's Augusta Bureau. Now, this is the debate among candidates for Commissioner of Agriculture. First, let's meet the candidates. They are in alphabetical order. Gary Black, a Republican, the current Commissioner of Agriculture in his second term. And Fred Swan, a Democrat, has served in his local Democratic Party and was elected to be a congressional district chair for the Democratic Party of Georgia Executive Committee in 2014. Now, our panelists. Maggie Lee is a freelance reporter covering state politics in Georgia, and Jill Nolan covers state government for Community Newspaper Holdings Incorporated. Now let's get started. For rules on today's debate, please visit the Atlanta Press Club website, atlantapressclub.org. To start the debate, each candidate will be asked one question. Maggie Lee, you get the first question to Fred Swan.
Sure, Mr. Swan, let's talk about food and education. A lot of people don't know where their food comes from, what a strawberry plant looks like. Is this stuff important to know? And if so, what's an agriculture commissioner's role in strengthening agricultural education?
Thank you, Maggie. I would say that this information is vital for consumers to have the best information possible when making purchases for their families. It is important for people to know when making decisions for their schools. School nutrition is an all-time high concern for communities. And if people don't know where their food is coming from, they can't expect the best when it comes to their food. And they can't we also need to make sure that we're having more local choices in terms of school food, in terms of food that's available. And if people don't know where their food is coming from, then they obviously can't make appreciable differences in the choices that they're going to make for their families. So I would say it's vital that we get more agricultural education into schools.
And Jill, your question for Gary Black.
Hi, Commissioner. State lawmakers are currently looking at possibly growing industrial hemp in Georgia, which could provide access to Georgians who are on the low THC oil registry. If lawmakers go that route, what would you do to ensure that the industry is carefully regulated without stifling its growth?
Joe, one of the issues with industrial hemp and other forms of cannabis is just the regulatory structure, and we've got to spend quite a bit of time figuring out how to get that right. I'm working with State Representative John Corbett right now on the House Study Committee. The legislature set up this time to visit other states and see what that structure is all about. They just returned from Kentucky. We've actually rescheduled today a meeting later this week with law enforcement to hear their concerns from GBI and the Sheriff's Association. There's also got to be a commitment to put the necessary resources to be able to enforce the rules. But overall, it's really a federal issue because there are no approved pesticides or products that can be used for any cannabis products right now. And so much of this still relies on the passage of a farm bill, and we'll just have to see what happens.
Well, that concludes the first portion of the debate. The candidates now have an opportunity to ask a question of their opponent. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask the question, 60 seconds to respond, and 30 seconds for a rebuttal. By random selection, Fred Swan, you may ask the first question.
Thank you. Commissioner Black, how many counties in Georgia do not have a supermarket? And follow on, what has the department done to affect that, and what plans do you have to change that?
Okay. First of all, Ms. Swan, I don't know the answer to the question of how many counties do not have a supermarket. I do know we have food inspectors in all of them, and we work. But really, the issue of food, issue of supermarkets is an economic one. It's one where you have to be in a critical mass with population. Now, we've done a terrific job with our Georgia Grown program in recent years, something we helped develop over the last 7, working with retailers all over the state, making sure that we have market access for producers. I tell you what, we open doors everywhere, all the way down to the little places like Edison, Georgia, where there is an IGA, and folks have access to Georgia Grown products. So certainly something we continue to work on, but basically it's an economic issue. And I look forward to being able to lead that in the future, make sure we've got access for everyone.
Mr. Black, your turn to ask a question. Your turn to ask a question.
Okay.
Before we do that, though, Mr. Swan,
you get the rebuttal.
Thank you. The answer is 14. And I would say that while it is an economic issue, as you stated, it's also an issue of leadership and the ability to look for innovative ways to find solutions, work with the legislature, use the office's ability to lobby the legislature to find solutions that can be both market friendly and the ability to create sustainable products for so many communities that lack in the ability to find those solutions.
Would you agree, though, that grocery stores have to exist in a place where they're able to stay open rather than the government propping them open?
I would say that we can find innovative solutions such as tax abatement zones in areas where we know that a supermarket would be a public good.
Do you know that's a
Gentlemen, we need to move forward.
Okay.
We need to
That's
move
a local
forward.
issue.
We need to move forward. And Mr. Black, again, it's your turn to ask a
Yes,
question
sir.
at this point.
Mr. Swan, what compels you to get in this race after running for Congress for a complete year, but 1 hour before qualifying? What compelled you to get in this race before that ended?
Sure. What compelled me to enter this race was the same thing that compelled me to enter the previous race, which was I sought to find ways for rural economic development. That's what compelled me to get in the congressional race in the first place. But then when I saw that there was no one running in this race, and quite frankly, the Department of Agriculture had failed to work on rural economic development issues, I decided it was time for someone to have a vision for economic development, to step in, work, and find solutions for our communities that involve the power of agriculture to work for everybody, not just for the select few.
Well, you're wrong.
And your rebuttal, sir?
You're wrong, yes, because folks visit georgiagrown.com, you'll see 1,000 businesses using this brand that we helped develop 7 years ago, and it is the economic model really for the nation when it comes to agriculture. But the reason you got in this race is, I still think, is absolutely political. Your party came to you and convinced you to do that, to abandon running for Congress for a year. I really think it's important that you have an experienced person, someone that's actually qualified to do that job, and I look forward to the opportunity to serve Georgians this next 4 years.
Well, that concludes our second round. For those who are just joining us, this is the debate between candidates for the Commissioner of Agriculture. We'll now go back to the panel to ask questions to the candidate of her choice until we run out of time. As a point of privilege, I may ask a question as well from time to time, and we'll determine when a rebuttal is appropriate. So let's get started. Jill Nolan, you get the first question in this round.
Hi, I'd like to ask a question, Mr. Swan. You've said that you would revive the state's farmers markets as a way to increase access to locally grown food.
That's correct.
So I was wondering what you would do specifically to entice local growers to use those markets.
Growers are looking for local markets to begin with. If you give them the markets, they will come. Part of the issue is that so many of our growers have to go so far just to get access to local markets or markets in general. And if you have something that is closer by to them and we provide them that space, they are going to use it. Well, I've been told by so many farmers, I just don't have the number of avenues in order to meet local needs. If I had more markets, if I had more supermarkets that took in locally sourced food, if I had more farmers markets, more pop-up markets, more small markets, I wouldn't have to travel so far, sometimes hundreds of miles, just to sell my goods and services. Honestly, this is a no-brainer, and this is something where we can actually implement something very cheaply that people working on the ground are already doing the job. We just need to give them the support that they need to get it done.
Just to follow up, I wonder why you think they're not using it currently.
Well, part of it is that the state farmers markets the booths are actually so expensive that if you're a small grower, you really can't get into that market. And so, quite frankly, you can't, if you're only bringing like a crate or two of goods or products, you really can't make your money off of that. You really need smaller pop-up markets in order to go ahead and be able to sell your wares. You can see that in the Macon State Farmers Market. Just visit it on any day and you'll see it's kind of a ghost town.
Mr. Black, you'd like to respond to that?
Yeah, I'd love to point out that for farmers coming to a Georgia State Farmers Market to stay one day, there's no cost for a stall. Come to Atlanta State Farmers Market, a farmer's stall, there's $6 a day. That cost is really not an issue. We do need more. I support having more pop-up markets. Matter of fact, we've helped facilitate through our Georgia Grown program and have many of those markets that are part of our promotional efforts. But it is all about Georgia continues to grow. We need more farmers markets, and I look forward to working to advance that.
Maggie Lee, you have a question.
Sure. To continue on the theme, I'd like to ask Commissioner Black. Of course, there's been an audit of Georgia's 9 state-run farmers markets. Most of them cost more to operate than they generate in revenue. Some of them can't attract vendors or visitors. You know, the agriculture market, as the auditor said, is different than it was 50 or 80 years ago. What do you do with those state-run farmers markets? What needs to happen?
Well, Maggie, our system of markets was built 70 years ago, and they were built in different places at a different time in agriculture. Agriculture has changed, and our markets are actually huge hubs for distribution now, and they're terminal markets. We look forward to building on what we've got going on to Atlanta State Farmers Market now with a new building and probably 3 more, a couple of more that can meet the needs of the southeastern market. But it's important to point out our markets are actually way in a profitable situation. They return dollars to the state coffers. They're housed in various rural communities. That some were actually never meant to. They're meant to serve the community, and so we work with the legislature all the time. Continue to hope to do that in the future, and I think there's a future for them, but they're just different. There'll be terminal markets. But will always be a place for Georgia-grown farmers at every one of our state farmers markets.
Thank you.
Ms. Nolan, your question.
This question is for Commissioner Black. State lawmakers have spent the last few legislative sessions looking at how to revitalize rural Georgia. A lot of communities have watched their populations dwindle and the jobs dry up. As Ag Commissioner, what have you done to help strengthen those fragile economies?
Thanks, Jill. One of the things that the legislatures worked with us very closely with the Georgia Grown program and really dealt us in on this hand for rural development. We've just added a domestic manager for Georgia Grown, which will be working with rural businesses all over to advance the brand domestically here in the United States. We already have 15 trade missions planned between now and next July 1st. Also on the international side, to build the international aspect of the brand. We have a new manager there. He just returned from Jakarta, Indonesia. We have 7 more international trade missions planned between now and July that will link up Georgia Grown members, rural businesses from all over the state to have access to these markets. That's going to be a great job creator and to advance it for Georgia Grown families for sure for the next generation.
Maggie, your question.
Sure. And a question for Mr. Swan. Can you talk some about your professional background? It doesn't seem to touch on agriculture much. What do you say to people who are looking for someone with an agricultural background in this job?
I would say that my background is in business and also in rural economic development, which is what the previous question touched on. Honestly, if we're looking for someone who has a huge technical background in agriculture and can answer a bunch of agricultural trivia questions, I mean, we should really be electing Google. But quite frankly, we're looking for someone who has a vision for Georgia's rural economy, someone who can see the power of agriculture in urban settings, someone who knows what we can do with agriculture and isn't just relying upon the settings of the past, but looking towards the 21st century, looking towards new technologies such as hydroponics, looking towards ways in which we can actually innovate agriculture so that it works for all Georgians.
Thank you.
Jill.
This is a question for both of you. Lawmakers recently increased significantly the amount of money that goes toward promoting and marketing the Georgia Grown program. For Commissioner Black, what's the argument for using taxpayer dollars in this way?
Well, first of all, it's important to have the staffing necessary to feed those programs. Now, where we started, there were no state dollars. We formed a commodity commission, much like all the other promotional commissions that farmers fund themselves. And currently, we're very close to 1,000 license holders that utilize the state brand. Those dollars are retained under the law within our marketing division. That's generating a little over $200,000 a year for us to actually conduct activities. But just as we invest in Department of Economic Development, Department of Transportation, other things to drive economic development for the state, it's important to do that through the Georgia Grown program. And I stand solid with this legislature and this governor. They've done a good job, and we've been good stewards.
And for Mr. Swan, Do you think state dollars should be used in that way?
I think that state dollars should be used to promote Georgia grown if Georgia grown were actually being promoted in an effective manner. Quite frankly, most people wouldn't know what Georgia grown is. They have no idea what it is. It doesn't really, it's not something that they see in their local markets. We talk about we're going on trade missions to Jakarta and doing all this international trade. Meanwhile, who's talking about feeding Moultrie or Osceola or Roberta or so many places where people don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables? I would really much rather see Georgia grown focus much more on local markets and making sure that Georgians take advantage of the brand and have access to those products personally. And if that means marketing those things out so people know to look for it and know that they can utilize that to help their local communities, then I'm all for that. But quite frankly, I think it's been marketed very ineffectually. I think it's been something that's not been utilized in a very effective manner. And I would like to see taxpayer dollars used in a way that really helps all Georgians, not just a select few.
Maggie, your question.
I'd like to ask this question to both of you. Undocumented immigrants have been a vital part of the agriculture industry, and efforts to curb undocumented immigration have meant a shortage of workers in agriculture jobs. I know a state agriculture commissioner can't set federal immigration policy, but I know nobody wants to see produce rot in the fields. What do you do in this situation? Can we hear from Mr. Swan first?
Sure. I think that immigration is a vital part of our agricultural balance. Quite frankly, I met with someone at Pearson Farms who explained to me that even his migrant workers who are here legally are very important to his productivity, because peaches only grow for a season, and once it's done, they shut everything down. So they need someone who is transitory, who does only want work for so many months and then move on to something else. So we need to make sure we have a system where we can use immigrant work, most specifically migrant work, but even if they are undocumented, because they are a vital part of our program, our agricultural program. Meanwhile, the Agriculture Commissioner has a huge voice in terms of lobbying for immigration reform. And we should be working to say we want more workers who are going to come in and do the job that Americans are simply unable to do, and make certain that we have access to our agricultural products year-round.
Commissioner?
First, I'm thankful for Lawton Pearson's support, and we've worked together on these issues for a long time. First group of farmers I ever took to Washington on this issue was in 1997 when I was working with Georgia Farm Bureau. All that has changed since then is the calendar when it comes to the H-2A program and the legal way to have guest workers. Senator David Perdue's got a good bill. Chairman in the House, Chairman Goodlatte has a good bill on the House side. We need a congressional spine to address the H-2A system. It needs to be more streamlined. Farmers need a guarantee that workers are going to arrive on time. They need a legal way. We need legal workers here to do work and go home. It can be achieved if we can just get some cooperation from the Congress.
Jill, your question.
Also a question for both of you. Georgia produce growers are having to contend with Mexican-grown blueberries and other fruits and vegetables that are flooding the market. What should be done to help better protect Georgia produce growers from these often cheaper produce?
Jill, what we've done already is we have asked the congressional delegation in Georgia, Democrat and Republican, to vote no on the Mexican side of this NAFTA suggestion, of this new evolution of NAFTA. Current NAFTA does not work for fruit and vegetable growers. They've been in a steady decline in Florida, tomato and strawberry, and it's headed here with our leadership in blueberry. And when we have 60 million pounds of Mexican blueberries coming on top of our market window, we've got a real problem. I've asked them to vote no. I've already had meetings with Ambassador Greg Dowd, the U.S. Trade Representative. They know my position. I have echoed that in the White House. So I'm hopeful with the leadership of Representative Buddy Carter, certainly with Senator Perdue, that we can get a little bit of leverage to have a little bit better deal when it comes to finalizing the Mexican side of this agreement.
Mr. Swan?
Certainly, trade is an issue that we have to deal with, but quite frankly, with the lapse of local markets, one of the issues that we have is that we don't have enough local markets for our growers to take advantage of. And so if we have more local markets, there would be more availability for them to take advantage of the consumers who would be utilizing these products. So at the end of the day, once we have more open markets, more farmers markets, more supermarkets, etc., we will have more opportunity for people to take advantage of those products, and that will drop the price. And it really won't matter if we're getting dumped on by Mexico, because quite frankly, the people are going to see the better quality of Georgia products, especially if Georgia Grown were a better program than it is currently.
You had a rebuttal?
Yeah, this issue doesn't have anything to do with local markets. It has everything to do with whether the Mexican government is going to plant 2.5 million acres of fresh fruits and vegetables, quite frankly, with some support from Western growers out of California in order to steal our market. That's what this is all about. And we've got too much invested in agriculture here in the state for that to happen. And I'm going to lead in working with our growers all across this state to work on a congressional delegation. Hopefully we can have a resolution with the administration.
Maggie.
Sure. How about a question for Commissioner Black? We're seeing what appears to be an escalating trade war between the U.S. and China. A tariff on pecans, for example, means fewer international buyers will be lining up to pay high prices for them, though Georgia consumers may enjoy lower prices. Who do you see as the winners and losers here? And what's your message to Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue when you're talking on the phone?
Yeah, we've talked about it quite a bit, and one of our biggest problems with the China deal, first of all, our producers across the state are standing firm and believing that we'll be better when this is all over. But I tell you that for the short term, we've got some vulnerability. We do have a 47% tariff on pecan. Part of our problem with pecan is we've concentrated our portfolio. About 40% of our product is going to China, and that's been real good for us. But we've got to expand on markets, hence our recent trip to Indonesia and working with India and South Korea and other places that we have planned. But the message is that China has been cheating. China's retaliatory actions are illegal, and we must make a stand. Our producers believe that it is time to make a stand, and we'll endure this together. We've got to expand markets, and we look forward to working with Secretary Perdue to find some of these solutions, and I'm certain it's going to happen.
You have a rebuttal, sir.
Yes, I'm just wondering, Commissioner Black mentioned that the producers are standing with the administration, and yet we know that Commissioner, Secretary Perdue, and Senator Perdue all had to go through and do a tour of producers and basically calm their nerves, which they really didn't do, about the effects of these trade deals. I've spoken with producers who are very nervous about what's going on. And quite frankly, what they want to see is action, and they want to know how they're going to get back to the rules that were established before.
That is, unfortunately, all the time we have for questions. And each candidate will now have 60 seconds for a closing statement. Gary Black, you get the first closing statement.
To our farm families and other citizens in South Georgia, we want you to know we're standing in prayer with you in the path of Michael, and we'll be ready to assist you in the aftermath of this storm. I'm honored to serve as your Commissioner of Agriculture. Our food safety program in Georgia is the best in the nation. School nutrition is improving. Market opportunities for Georgia-grown farm families and rural entrepreneurs are expanding. We are better prepared now to manage animal disease and natural disasters. This is my record, but there's more to do. I'll continue to work to improve career paths for our employees. We'll establish an international presence for Georgia Grown, and I'll always govern with conservative values. I'm Gary Black. I'd be honored to earn your vote in earning advance voting, early voting, or on election day. Thank you for the privilege of being with you today. God bless you, and God bless the great citizens of Georgia.
And Mr. Swan, your turn.
I'd like to thank the Atlanta Press Club as well as Georgia Public Broadcasting for the opportunity to allow us to both state our visions for agriculture in Georgia. And I'd like to close with a story. I was in Columbus at a campaign event, and a woman came up to me, tears in her eyes, wanted to tell me the story about how her family had to sell the farm that she grew up on. And this is not a story that is uncommon throughout Georgia. Quite frankly, she lost her home due to the encroachment of big ag corporations, making it difficult for her family to maintain. I want to change that. I want to make certain that more small farms are available to more people throughout the state. I want to make certain that no one has to make that choice, that generations of farmers don't have to end in this year. Quite frankly, Commissioner Black and I have both laid out a vision for agriculture. His comes from his big ag lobbying past. Mine comes from my past coming from a HUD housing development. I just ask that you look at your values, research us both, and make your choice on November 6th. Thank you.
Well, that concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that Election Day is Tuesday, November 6th, and you should certainly remember the early voting begins on October 15th. Our thanks to the candidates and to the panel of journalists. I'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club and Georgia Public Broadcasting for arranging for today's debate. For more information and the full schedule of general election debates, please visit atlantapressclub.org. This debate will be archived and they're on Georgia Public Broadcasting's website, gpb.org. Thanks for joining us. I'm Drew Dawson. We appreciate you being here.